Hey readers, here we are again for another couple of chapters of Planet Omar, Trouble Magnet. So we last stopped, we finished chapter 4, so now we're on to chapter 5. But like I showed you in my last read aloud video, I always like to check my notes just to kind of get my brain back oriented to where I was in the story. And it's like doing a little orienting for each chapter, right? So let's do that first. Then we'll pick out some skills to focus on today, and then we'll start reading. And also I have my tools. I got my book, my notebook, my pen, and some sticky notes. Here was our notes from last week. So I was working on envisioning and predicting and thinking about the story elements. When I was envisioning, I could see the prayer room and all the characters together. Because remember, Issa, the little brother, like blew the whistle and made this huge problem. At the end of chapter 4, I noted that, whoa, I'm loving this book. There's so many interesting details and craft techniques. I'm also really enjoying getting to know the characters more and more. Omar is so funny. So now I've got my brain ready to read. I'm going to go to the narrative learning progression and pick out some skills to focus on today. All right, here we are in the narrative reading progression. And, as I was checking my notes just then, I realized I was talking a lot about the craft techniques and also the characters. So I think I'm going to move down in our progression to some of these more challenging skills. Now that I'm like a few chapters in, I'm starting, I understand the story and all those things. And what did I want to think about? I wanted to think about analyzing parts of the story in relation to the whole, specifically the characters. So, because I think the characters are so important in this story. And so I'm really going to think about it as I read today, and I'm going to take some notes about that. Another thing I want to work on is analyzing the author's craft, right? Zainab Mian does a lot of really cool stuff in this story to, like here, I notice when the author has done something that stands out, elaborate on a part, used an image or line repeatedly, used figurative language, begun or ended a text in an unusual way, and I think, why did the author do that? So I'm going to do some deep thinking about that as I do my reading today. So I'm going to write down my skills, analyzing parts of the story in relation to the whole, and also analyzing author's craft. So I've got my skills noted here that I'm going to focus on analyzing parts of the story in relation to the whole and also analyzing the author's craft. So I'm kind of leveling up my skills today, and I'm going to do some analytic reading. Are you ready? Here we go. Chapter 5. When I woke up on Monday morning, I felt like my lungs were pushing air out of me and not taking any back in. My stomach was a giant heavy rock, making it impossible for me to get out of bed. Reasons: I was nervous. What if nobody likes me? What if the work is harder than my last school? What if nobody wants to be my friend? What if the teacher is an alien? Okay, so right off the bat, I've been noticing throughout reading this whole story that the author does a lot of cool craft techniques, but today I'm really focusing on it. So I noticed here on this page that they almost did like a title, like, right? She, reasons why I was nervous. And then the author, put the different reasons here and put an image next to each one. I think that's pretty cool. I'm going to make a quick note. So I just wrote that on page 18. I wrote craft because it's a craft thing I noticed. Zainab Mian made a list and put little doodles next to each thing on the list. We don't usually see that in fiction, and I think it's pretty cool. Okay, so we know Omar is feeling super duper nervous about starting school. So let's see how the rest of his morning goes. Miriam poked her head around the door and said, "Hurry up, lazy head, and stop pretending to be sick." I wasn't. I wondered how her lungs felt. She was acting pretty Miriam-like, so her lungs seemed to be normal. Then Dad appeared at the door too and gave her one of his silly looks, which made his face look like he knew a secret. He came in and tickled me and threw me over his right shoulder, then carried me downstairs and plunked me down in front of a bowl of porridge. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Yuck. But actually, when you put hazelnut spread into your bowl of porridge, it tastes very yummy. Though I'm only allowed one spoonful of hazelnut spread. I ate slowly because of the rock in my tummy. Mom said it would be okay and the teacher would make sure I had friends. I dragged my logs up the stairs, used to be known as my legs, until they got so heavy. I washed up and went to my room. There was no uniform at this school, so I was allowed to wear whatever I wanted. I looked for my favorite sweatshirt and finally pulled it out from the space between my bed and my bedside table. Then I looked for my favorite jeans. They were exactly where I had left them, on the floor next to the bookshelf. They had a stain on them from when Issa threw a barbecue chicken wing at me. Oh well, I put them on anyway. I went downstairs and my mom went wild. I mean, she took one look at me and flew off the handle. She said she couldn't believe it. That's all she said, actually. She said it 5 times. I don't believe it. 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 Dad said calmly, "Son, I think Allah has given you clean clothes to wear, so go and put them on, please, or we will be late." Then he heaved me onto his shoulder again and helped me take out some clothes from my dresser. I put them on as fast as humanly possible and ran down the stairs. I flew out the front door toward the car where my mom was waiting with an angry look on her face. Okay, let me just take a quick note. I have so many things going around in my head. One was about the craft again. Zainab Mian does a really good job of showing how her characters are feeling. She used 2 very specific places, 2 very specific times when she used figurative language. One was when, he woke up and he said his lungs felt like rocks, I think it was. When I woke up on Monday, I felt like my lungs were pushing air out of me and not taking back any in. My stomach was a giant heavy rock. So his stomach was a rock. And then a few pages later, Omar says that I dragged my logs up the stairs, used to be known as my legs, until they got so heavy. So with both of those use of language places, like I know that feeling of feeling like your stomach is so heavy because you're nervous and there's a big rock in there. Is there really a rock in his stomach? No, but it's figurative language, right? It's used to describe how the character is feeling. And also when he said that he dragged his logs up the stairs. Are his legs really logs? No, it's figurative language. It's helping us to understand that like he is really, just dragging himself up the stairs and his legs feel so heavy. So I'm going to make a note of that. And I'm also going to add a little bit of my own thinking of why I think Zainab Mian chose to do that. Okay. Okay, so I noticed page 30 and 34, this is a craft thing. I wrote the quote, "My stomach had a rock in it, and I dragged my logs up the stairs." Then I just wrote some of my own thinking. I think Zainab Mian chose this figurative language because she wanted to allow readers to know exactly how Omar was feeling. She didn't just say, "I was nervous." That would be boring. Okay, so there was also a lot I wanted to say about analyzing the characters in relation to the whole story, but I don't want to write too much at one time. So I'm going to focus on that in chapter 6, which we are going to start right now. The thought of getting into the car made my tummy feel like there were a million frogs hopping around in it, just waiting to leap up into my throat. So I took a deep breath and imagined a better way to get to school. On a super awesome, magnificent dragon. More figurative language. The a million frogs in my tummy. Like, wow, I know exactly how Omar is feeling. I could see him there now, just hovering beside our car and looking at me with a smile. The dragon made me feel better about everything. The dragon bowed his head and opened the car door for me, which made me laugh out loud. What's so funny, Omar? Mom asked, one hand still on the handle of the car door. But I just shook my head and unbuttoned. Wow, I'm having some fluency issues. Okay. But I just shook my head and buttoned my lips. Mom never really understands about how I imagine things, so there was no point in explaining. I guess it's just the kind of things grown-ups forget how to do. So I just stared at the dragon's blue and green shimmery scales and long swooping tail. As I strapped myself in, I wondered what it would be like to ride him to school instead of driving. He'd fly at least 120 miles per hour. He looked at me with his almond-shaped eyes and let out a puff of steam from his tiny nostrils. I imagined him riding alongside us all the way to school. When we got out and walked to the gate, I made him breathe a huge plume of steam. And in my head, I said, I pronounce thee H2O, as if I was a king or something. I thought that was a good name for him because steam is made from water and H2O is the chemical name for water. That's the kind of sciencey things my parents love to talk about. Okay. I'm just going to take a pause here to think about how creative Omar is. Like, Zainab Mian really made this character to be super, super imaginative and creative. Like, he just imagined this whole dragon and it wasn't just like, I pictured a dragon. I wish I could ride a dragon to school. The author, and then because Zainab Mian went into a lot of detail thinking about like what that dragon looked like and how fast it was going and all these things. Like, this book is so cool. Okay, let's keep going. So there I was, the new kid in class. I was petrified and my lungs were still doing that funny thing. I made them feel better by imagining H2O being silly at the window. He stuck his tongue out. Then he put popcorn in each of his nostrils and blew it out. The teacher, who is called Mrs. Hutchinson, introduced me to the class. She was what my mom would call a pear-shaped person. I liked her hair from the first time I saw her, and later I learned that the springy auburn curls reacted to her mood and told the story of her day. When she was happy, those curls were happy. They would bounce merrily out of her head like beams of sunshine. When she was tired, they would flop down lazily on her cheeks. And when she was angry, they looked more like the twisty metal part of a drill. Sometimes, when she was angry, I would imagine a drill-headed Mrs. Hutchinson making a big hole in the wall quite easily. She asked me to sit down next to a red-headed kid called Charlie. Charlie had lots of freckles all over his face and thick-rimmed glasses. I thought he looked cool, so I smiled at him. He smiled back at me. He was missing one of his front teeth. Charlie told me school was okay. The lessons were okay. The playground was okay when it wasn't wet. And Mrs. Hutchinson's class was mostly filled with okay kids, except for Daniel. I decided that okay was Charlie's favorite word. Daniel is the one you have to look out for, okay? Just stay out of his way. Okay, I said. I thought about all the times my mom had told me to stay away from something, which seemed to make me drawn toward it like a magnet instead. Just like when I had to just open Miriam's secret box because I was told I wasn't allowed to. And when I did, a gazillion teeny tiny beads came pouring out all over her bedroom floor just as she walked in. I gulped. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 6. And I'm thinking more about the characters and how they play different parts into this story. So up until chapter 6, right? Up until chapter 6, we were really just learning a ton about Omar's family. And that's kind of what I was thinking about in the beginning. But now we're learning more about some of the kids he'll be interacting with in his class. Charlie and Daniel specifically. So I'm just going to make a quick note about like those characters and how they might impact the plot, the problem, the solution, and those kind of things. Okay, so I have written, let me just zoom in. At the end of chapter 6, I'm noticing the characters play a huge role in this story. How Omar interacts with his family tells us a lot about him. Also, I think Charlie and Daniel will be major parts of the problem and solution in this book. So I'm kind of finding connections between the characters and different elements of this story, like problem and solution. I'm also just going to quickly note that this is part of my skill, analyzing parts. Maybe I'll just draw an arrow to show that. Cool. Okay, so I have to end this video now. It's getting quite long. I wish I could just spend all day reading. I really want to keep going on this book. We're about 1/4 of the way through, or about 1/4 of the way through. And we finished 6 chapters so far. We're learning so much about not only this story and like thinking about characters and then how it relates to the whole story, but also we're learning a ton about crafting techniques that will also help you if you're writing a narrative story. We could really use this as a mentor text in, you know, when we write our own stories with characters, how to tell lots of details about the characters. Wow, we have a lot of great examples of how to do that from this book. So that's it for today. You will catch me here next week where we will be reading the next 2 chapters. But for now, have so much fun and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.